This is the third part of muscle tissue. So far we've been talking about muscle fibers and muscle filaments and so on. In other words, we've been talking about it on a cell and subcellular level. But we can also talk about muscle contractions at the whole organ level. And so when we look at it on the whole organ level, we're going to see that there are two types of muscle contractions. One type is called isometric. Isometric, iso means same, and metric means length, same length. So an isometric contraction does not get any shorter. The muscle does not shorten. And the reason for that is because the load is not lifted. And so the muscle stays the same length. We also, though, have isotonic contractions. Iso means same, and tonic refers to tension. So the tension in the muscle is the same as the load. So if the same tension as the load happens, what's going to happen is the load is going to be lifted, and then the muscle will get shorter. So let's look at these two. Let's look at isometric first. So if you look at isometric, again, remember that word means same length. And so when we look at it, here's a situation. So here's a muscle that we dissected out. This is probably like a frog calf muscle, the gastrocnemius. And look, we put a weight on it, and this weight weighs 6 kilograms. 6 kilograms. Well, there is no way, no matter how hard this frog calf muscle can lift 6 kilograms, but that doesn't mean it won't contract. If we hook an electrode up to this muscle and we hook a little voltage through here, we send it through there, that muscle is going to contract. It's going to stiffen and contract like crazy. But again, there is just no way it's going to be able to lift 6 kilograms. And so if we look to see what's going to happen when we do stimulate the muscle, it is going to produce tension. But this is the maximum amount of tension it can produce right here. That much. And that is not 6. I don't know exactly what it is, but let's say it's 5.5. But 5.5 is not 6. And in order to lift 6 kilograms of weight, I have to produce 6 kilograms of tension. Not 5.5, not 5.6, not 5.7, not 5.6 kilograms. And if I don't produce that much tension, this cannot be lifted. And so even though this muscle is contracting like crazy, this is not going to be lifted. This muscle cannot get any shorter, and so the length of the muscle stays exactly the same. Same length. So when I look at an isometric contraction, the tension in the muscle never equals the load. The load is greater than the tension. And so the muscle cannot lift the load, and so the muscle does not get any shorter. And so when we look at it, here is an isometric contraction. So this person's trying to lift this weight. I don't know what it is, but let's say it's a 40-pound dumbbell. Well, this muscle is going to contract like crazy trying to lift 40 pounds. But if it can't produce 40 pounds of tension, this is not going to move. It won't move. And when it doesn't move, the muscle cannot get any shorter, so the muscle is going to stay the same length. So one more time. isometric means the muscle does not shorten. Tension goes up, but the muscle not going to shorten. So look, I'm pulling on this wire, whatever it is. There's a lot of weight here, hundreds of pounds. I can't lift hundreds of pounds, but that doesn't mean that my muscles can't try. But I can't reach the tension produced necessary to lift this, and so the muscle does not shorten. So in isometric, the tension goes up, but it never equals the load. The load is not moved, and so the length of the muscle remains unchanged. But if we go back and look at this again, remember this was 6 kilograms. This muscle can't produce 6 kilograms, but it can produce that much. We said it was 5.5. So what's going to happen if I take this weight off and I put a different weight on there? Look, I'm going to put a 3 kilogram weight on here. Well, 3 kilograms is less than 5.5. And so that means that this muscle can produce up to 5.5. I don't need 5.5 though to lift this weight. I only need 3. So when I contract it, when I send my little electricity here and I make the muscle contract, I don't need 5.5. I only need 3. So as soon as I reach 3, right there, as soon as 3 is reached, what's going to happen is the muscle is going to begin to shorten. And so the muscle will get shorter. But remember, this is isotonic, same tension. And so the tension in the muscle, remember the tension in the muscle is 3, it's equal to the weight being moved. And so in this situation, the tension in the muscle is equal to or greater than the weight of the load, and the muscle is going to lift the load, and then the muscle will shorten. And so if we look at it here, I took this weight, which was 40 pounds, and I took it off, and I put a 25 pound. And 25 pounds is something I can lift. And so when I exert 25 pounds of tension, this muscle will be able to lift this. And when that is lifted, the muscle is going to get shorter. So that's isotonic. So if we compare those two, it looks like this. So isometric, length never changes. And that's because the tension never reaches the amount of tension necessary to move the load. Isotonic, what's going to happen is I can produce more tension than whatever this weight is, but I only need to produce that much. So as soon as I produce that much tension, the load is going to be lifted and the muscle is going to get shorter. But look at this. If I do lift this, unless I just want to keep it up in the air forever, I've got to put it back down. Well, I could just drop it, just let it fall, but I don't want to do that. I want to put it back down. Same thing over here. Whenever I did this dumbbell curl and it gets shorter, I'm going to have to put this thing back down. And again, unless I just want to drop it, I'm going to use force. I'm going to continue force to put it back down. It's still going to require 25 25 pounds of pressure to keep it from falling. But look what's happening to the length of the muscle. Here the muscle is getting shorter, but here the muscle is getting longer. So there are two phases to an isotonic contraction. There's the phase where the muscle shortens, and there's the phase where the muscle lengthens. If it shortens, it's called concentric. If it lengthens, it's called eccentric. So this is another GIF. And you can see what happens is this person lifts this and lowers it, lifts this and lowers it. And so you get concentric and eccentric. Remember, concentric, the muscle is getting shorter. It shortens. Eccentric, the muscle lengthens. But I'm still requiring whatever this weight, 25, I still require 25. And if this is 25, I still require 25. Even though I'm putting it down, I'm still using 25 pounds of tension. Any questions about that? The next thing is, remember we said muscles use energy. They use energy. But think about the whole contraction cycle. We went through it, all those steps. The only thing that we said that had any energy in it, the only molecule was ATP. And ATP is the only energy source that can be used because that's the only thing that binds to the myosin head, just ATP. Not fats, not proteins, not carbohydrates, nothing but ATP. That's all the muscle can use for an energy source. And there's ATP that floats around in the cell because we produce it. And so as it moves around in the cell, it becomes attached to wherever it needs to be attached to. But there's a limited amount of ATP in the cell at any time. And when you run out of that ATP, when you run out of it, that's it. There's nothing else. There's no more. And so the amount of ATP available floating around in the cell is only enough for about 5 seconds worth of work. 5 seconds. So if we don't somehow replenish this ATP, at the end of 5 seconds, you couldn't do anything else. Fortunately, we can replenish this ATP. And there are different ways of replenishing it. The first way to replenish this ATP is with a storage protein in our cells. We have also in our cells, besides free ATP, we have something called creatine phosphate. So creatine phosphate is a storage form of energy. Remember, ATP has 3 phosphates on it, and we're going to take one off and make ADP. Well, creatine phosphate has 1 phosphate on it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the phosphate off of the creatine ATP, put it on the ADP, and create new ATP. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, a 1-to-1 replenishment. 1 creatine phosphate creates 1 new ATP. Well, we also don't have an unlimited amount of creatine phosphate. It's a storage form and we have it in there, but there's only a certain amount. And if we use up all of the creatine phosphate, that'll give us about another 15 seconds worth of ATP. So we had 5 seconds, now we've got 20 more. So that's about 25 seconds. And 25 seconds is really all we have. So if you're working out, if you're running, if you're jumping, if you're doing anything at 100% capacity, that means flat out running, flat out working, whatever it is, you can do it for about 20 seconds. And that's it. Well, it doesn't sound like much, but you can actually run a long way in 20 seconds. You can jump a long way in 20 seconds. And so this 20 seconds can help you get out of danger. It can help you save yourself. But if we don't have some way to replenish the ATP after that, again, you're just going to collapse. Well, there's no more storage of ATP, no more storage form. After this, we have to start producing ATP. So we have 5 seconds of ATP just free floating around. We have 15 seconds of ATP, or at least equivalent, storage. After that, we have to create new ATP. And there are only 2 methods that animal cells have to create new ATP. One of those is anaerobic glycolysis, and the other one is aerobic respiration. So let's look at anaerobic first. So remember what anaerobic means. It means without oxygen. Without oxygen. In other words, I don't have to supply blood to my cells. I don't have to breathe any harder. I don't have to pump blood any harder because I don't need oxygen to do this. The only problem with it is, though, I don't get very much ATP. With anaerobic glycolysis, what you do is you split glucose. You split it in half. And when you split it, you get some energy. And that energy is 2 ATPs. So, even though it's readily available, even though it's fast, it's a low energy, low efficiency. You only get 2 ATPs per glucose. And again, there's not an unlimited supply of glucose either. We only have a certain amount in our cells. And so if you use up every single glucose you have in the cell, that gives you another 30 to 60 seconds worth of ATP. So remember, we had 5 from free. We had 15 or so from storage. And now we have another, let's be generous and say 60. So now we're talking about 80 seconds worth of ATP. And if you think about what you can do in 80 seconds, you can do a really lot. You can run a long way in 80 seconds. You can jump a bunch of times. You can put out a lot of effort in 80 seconds. But again, at the end of that, you're out of glucose, you're out of creatine phosphate, you're out of free ATP. Everything just stops unless we can find another way to make ATP. So the other way is not anaerobic, it's aerobic. And aerobic requires oxygen. You have to have oxygen. Remember, we get oxygen from the air, but it's not at our muscle cells. We have to get it out of the air. We have to get it out of the air and into the blood. And then we have to get the blood to move around to the cell. And then we have to do diffusion to get it into the cell. And so it's slow. This whole process is slow. And so we're not going to be able to supply oxygen at the same rate that we do those other things. In other words, what you're going to have to do is slow down. Everything has to slow down. And then when you get here, it's not just one or two steps, it's a bunch of steps. You have to go through Krebs cycle. You have to go through the electron transport system to get the ATP. But when you do, you get 34 more. So you get 36 ATP. So it's a high yield. So if you do slow down to the point you can make ATP this way, you can do it for a really long time. So if you work out, run, whatever, at a slower rate, not sprinting, but at a slower rate, a rate slow enough you can supply oxygen, you can do this whole process so that you get all this ATP, you can do it for hours. So, 3 ways that we replenish or regenerate the ATP: creatine phosphate, anaerobic glycolysis, and then aerobic respiration. So if you do go to, say, an exercise class or something where you have a trainer or something, they're always constantly telling you to check your pulse. And the reason why is because that's an indication of how hard you're working. And you want to keep your pulse at a certain level below that so that that's low enough, slow enough that we can do this. And then you can just keep going and keep going because you get a lot of ATP. But if you run out of ATP, what you get is called fatigue. So when ATP production doesn't keep pace with ATP, you get fatigue. And one of the things that happens is not only do you run out of ATP, but you also build up waste products inside the muscle cell. One of those waste products is lactic acid. So when you build up lactic acid, you also change things like ion concentration. You wind up with this deficit of ATP. Sometimes that can cause things like spasms. Well, another thing is, so far we've been talking about muscle fibers as if they're all the same. So we've just been treating them all exactly the same, every skeletal muscle fiber. But they're not exactly the same. There are actually 3 types. And the 3 types are based on how thick they are, how much color they have, and which way they prefer to make ATP. Those things are going to affect whether or not they're fast or slow. So when we look at it, we're going to see 3 types. Now they go by different names. Some names I think are more descriptive than others. But anyway, they're called slow oxidatives, fast oxidative glycolytics, and fast glycolytics. They have these other alternate names too. But let's look at them. If you look at slow, they're called that because they are slow. They don't contract very quickly, so they're what's called slow twitch. So a slow twitch, if you graphed it, would have a wide thing. It would take a long time to go from contraction to relaxation, slow. Another thing about these, and another nickname is that they're red. Sometimes they're called red socks. They're red. Well, the reason they're red is because of a product they have called myoglobin. So red fibers have a lot of myoglobin. Well, what myoglobin is it's kind of a cousin to hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is what you find in blood that carries oxygen. It transports oxygen. Well, myoglobin doesn't transport oxygen, it stores oxygen. So if you have a lot of oxygen stored, you don't need to carry as much to the cell. And so if you have a lot of oxygen, then you can do aerobic respiration. And if you do aerobic, you're going to get a lot of ATP. And if you have a lot of ATP, it's going to take a long time for you to get fatigued. So they have a high resistance to fatigue. They also have a great blood supply. That way they get plenty of oxygen. And they're also skinny. They're very small in diameter and they're not very strong. So those are slow oxidatives. Here's what one of those looks like. Look how red it is. Look how skinny it is. So they're slow fibers, very fatigue resistant. And so you find these slow fibers in things that somebody can do for long periods of time without getting tired. Think about it. You can stand for long periods of time without getting tired. You can hold your head up forever, it seems like. And so the muscles that have these red fibers are postural muscles. Well, think about posture. Think about standing. Think about holding your head up. It does not need to happen fast. It's slow, but you don't want it to get tired. You don't want your head to just fall over. And so they're very fatigue resistant. And so when you look at them, they look like this, or here they are in cross section, and they're these. So these are red socks. They're red, they're slow, and they're oxidative. Let's skip over and look to these over here. So these are called fast glycolytics. They're called fast because that's exactly right. They're very fast twitch. So remember, these had a twitch cycle like this. These are going to have a twitch cycle like this. In other words, they're going to contract and relax very quickly. If you look at what color they are, they're white. And the reason they're white is because they have very little myoglobin. Remember, this stores oxygen. So they don't have any stored oxygen. And if you don't have any stored oxygen, you're going to run out of oxygen really quick. And so instead of doing aerobic, they do anaerobic glycolysis. Well, remember, that's very, very quick, but you don't get very much ATP. And so since you have not much ATP, you only get 2 per glucose, they get tired very quickly. They have low fatigue resistance. They also do not have a very good blood supply, so they can't replenish their oxygen very well. But they're very fast and they're very strong. They're very powerful. And so think about the muscles that are really, really fast and also really, really strong. This is like the muscles in your arms, in your hands, and things like that. These muscles, you can move your hands really, really, really fast, but they get tired. You may have had writer's cramp at some point in your life. Or if you just grab a tennis ball and squeeze the tennis ball, you can squeeze it really hard, but you can't squeeze it very long. And then we have these middle fibers, these. Well, these are sort of in the middle of everything. Look, they do oxidative, but they also do glycolytic. They're medium fast. They're medium in terms of fatigue resistant. They're medium in terms of myoglobin. Everything's in the middle. They're also medium in strength. They're intermediate in blood supply. They're intermediate or in the middle everywhere. And this is the way most muscles in the body are. So most muscles fall into this category. So we looked at the red ones. That was these. Let's look at the white ones, these. And if you look at the white ones, they look like this. So look how pale they are. That's because they don't have much myoglobin. Look how thick in diameter they are. They're really, really thick. You can see it in cross section over here. So these are very fast, but they tire very easily. These are very slow, but they don't get tired. And then most muscles are somewhere in between these two. So they're not red, they're pink. So they're pink, they're medium in diameter. They're medium in speed. They're medium in how quickly they get tired. They do both glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, both anaerobic and aerobic. They do both. Well, we can see this under a microscope, these red and white, but you don't even need a microscope. Look, you can see it right here. So look, that is red meat. The reason it's red meat is because it's red fibers. But look, that's white meat. And the reason it's white is it's white fibers. And then remember there was a twitch cycle. So here you can see the twitch cycle for each of these. And so if you look, here is that slow twitch. So these are the ones that are dark red. They do aerobic. They do not tire very easily. They're fatigue resistant. And then if you look over here at these are those fast twitch. Look how short that cycle is. It's only this long and it's over with. They're white. Remember, they're very powerful, strong muscles, but they get tired very easily. They tire or fatigue quickly. And then if you look at this one in the middle, this is that medium one. So this is the intermediate. And remember, it's intermediate in everything. It's intermediate in color, they're pink. It's intermediate in speed, they're medium fast. They're intermediate in their fatigue, resistance. Everything is sort of intermediate. And so when you look at these three muscles right here, you can see that they have different abilities. This is one of those eyeball muscles, and you can move your eyeballs around really, really, really fast. You can move them, but if you do that just a little bit, if you flick your eyeballs back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it's going to get tired very quickly. This one is one of those standing muscles. It's a postural muscle. It's in your lower leg, but it keeps you standing upright, holds you upright. It's a postural muscle. And then this one is a running and jumping muscle. And so if you think about it, you can run and jump, but you can't do it nearly as long as you can stand. So again, here are these three types. So we have these red socks, we have these fogs, and these FGs. Or you could think of them as red, pink, and white. You can think of them as anaerobic, aerobic, and both. You can think of them as fast, medium, and slow, and so on, however you want to do it. Any questions? But no matter which type of muscle fiber it is, you can make it work better. So with physical training, you get a bunch of different things happening. The amount of glucose that's stored goes up, glycogen. The enzyme goes up, the number and efficiency. The blood supply goes up, mitochondrial levels go up, myoglobin levels go up. And so all those things are going to make you faster, they're going to make you stronger. They're also going to make you get tired less or a lot longer. So you're going to not fatigue. So that was skeletal muscle. But remember, we also have cardiac and smooth muscle. Now, each of these have their own chapter, so we're not going to really spend any time talking about them here. But this is a nice table to show you the differences. So you can look down here and see skeletal muscle, and then you can come over here and look cardiac, and you can come over here and look at smooth. And so when you look at these three, we've already looked at them under the microscope. They're skeletal, but then here's cardiac, and then here's smooth. Remember, they have some things that are alike, some things that are different. Same thing here when you talk about the connective tissue coverings. Some are alike, some are different. Same thing with myofibrils. Same thing with sarcoplasmic reticulum, everything. And then if you look at this contraction cycle, the speed, remember there's three types here, but there's only one type of these, and there's only one type of these. And then look how slow this is. This is also slow, but not quite as slow. And then here again, three different speeds. Any questions? So that concludes muscle physiology. So next time we come back, we're going to jump backwards in the book and we're going to do joints.